Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is.
Christopher Wells.
Thank you for supporting us on our journey. And, as always, do us a favor and hit the sub button, like the video before it starts, and turn on our noties. But really, before we get started with today's episode, also follow us on Instagram and Twitter at the OBT Podcast to stay connected with us. But for this episode, it's kind of a more interesting one. NBA news has been kind of dry because, it's the end of the season. Everyone's just waiting for the playoff build up and the hype. It's getting to everybody. But yeah, we want to do a little bit more of a fun segment. And we're going to start with kind of like our before the season ends award predictions. So, MVP, all those awards. We're going to go through the litany, minus the all NBA teams. We're going to save that for a later date, but we're just going to do the major awards to kick it off. And yeah, to start this off, we're going to start with the biggest award, I think, and that is MVP.
Sure.
And I'm picking Nikola Jokic for my
All right.
MVP. Yeah, he's been averaging basically a triple double, and he's solid. I think he's the best big in the NBA. I think it is a very close race between Embiid and Jokic. I have to give the shout out to Embiid, but Jokic I feel like is just a little bit better because they tend to win a little bit more too. They're the number one seed in the West, and there's no set criteria for the MVP what constitutes if you're the most valuable player in the league. But in my opinion, I think wins and win shares definitely have to contribute to something. So, I take record into account alongside stats and what your impact is on the floor. And he's just doing stuff that we've never seen from a big man. It's just crazy. And I think this will be his third MVP.
Yeah.
So it would be back to back to
Three
back.
straight.
Yeah, three straight if he wins it. I hope he does. But the NBA always tends to change the criteria. They don't like to see, a lot of guys go back to back, to be honest. And I don't know. I really like Jokic, and it's like I said, Embiid definitely gives Jokic a run for his money. I can't not talk about that, but I think, he's had so many triple doubles this season, even more than Luka, and he's just light years ahead of everybody but Embiid. So that's why I have to give it to him.
Yeah. So I'm actually gonna, I guess, zig or zag, whichever
Okay.
one you prefer, and I'm actually gonna go with Embiid. Now I'm gonna preface things by saying, like you said, it's our as of right now picks.
Right.
So at least for me, it could probably change. But I think for me right now, and I had Jokic for a long time, but the only issue that I had like with picking Jokic right now is with Denver, they've gone about 500 in their
Right.
last 10 games. Obviously, they were way ahead initially at the top of the Western Conference, but teams have kind of started to close in. They're going to keep the one seed. I'm pretty confident about that, but they just haven't looked as great as of late, and it's not necessarily his fault.
Right.
It's just inconsistent play from guys on the team, right? The bench hasn't been great. But then you look at Embiid, right? And he's at, stats wise, 33 and a half, 10 rebounds, 4 assists, and they've won 8 straight. Every single one of those games, he's averaged 30 or more. And it just feels like Philly's peaking right now. And then, obviously we may talk about them later, but they actually passed the Celtics for the second seed in the Eastern Conference, which I don't think as many people would have expected a week ago. Boston's been kind of up and down.
Right.
When it looked like for a while they were kind of the team to beat, especially earlier in the season.
Right.
So obviously it could change, and like you said, I do believe it's very close. Right now, I would have the edge to Embiid just because I think he and his team have been better, and I think this because it's such a close race. I think the last few weeks are gonna matter, and they should matter. And I don't know if it's that Denver's coasting or if like a lot of the success that they were having earlier is just kind of starting to run out a little bit.
Right.
But regardless, I think that does matter. So for now, I'm gonna have Embiid, but it's so close, and I think I don't have him in there, but I think you could have Giannis potentially in there too because the Bucks have the best record. He's been great. So this is an MVP race that I think is gonna come down to the wire. And I don't think you can go wrong with any of these guys. And this discussion has been crazy for the last month or so, right? Because for a while it was like we said, Jokic was pretty much the complete front runner. And then you had people over, the last few weeks, kind of putting in other guys into the conversation. So,
Right.
for me right now, I got Embiid, but like I said, I want to preface it by saying it could change.
Yeah.
Um, right? I don't feel super strongly about it right now, but for me, I have Embiid.
Yeah. It's a close call, and
Yeah,
I feel like the MVP is pretty much. There's
right.
always a fiasco or controversy with it, so
Exactly.
we'll see what
Yeah.
happens. But
And I just
it's
also,
interesting.
just want to throw in there like, this is not like anything directed at Jokic because I know
Oh
like,
yeah.
with the MVP race the last few years, there's kind of been like, an argument about people picking their guys and kind of trying to put down other players. And
Right.
I'm not doing that here. Right now, like I said, I have Embiid just because I think he's played better, but it's not like some type of shot or some type of slight for Jokic. I just want to point that out there.
Right. Um. So yeah, moving on. We've got Defensive Player of the Year.
Mm-hmm.
This one's another interesting one. People kind of hate on it too, and
Mm-hmm.
think that some of the guys who win this tend to be overvalued.
Mm-hmm.
But for my pick, I don't know if this one's a hot take, but I'm going with Giannis.
Ooh.
Yeah, I'm picking Giannis, and
Mm-hmm.
I know everybody's like, "What about Jaren Jackson Jr.?" I can hear it now. I'm a little bit higher on Giannis. I think he's a little bit more mature. Um, and like, if you really think about it, I think he at one point had a higher like defensive share, win share, or something like that over
Mm-hmm.
Jaren Jackson. So that means like when he's out there, he's giving it his all, and he's a defensive guy, and it's as simple as that. Um, but like it's tough because Jaren Jackson is really good.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. He's been averaging
Plus,
around like three or so blocks, maybe more. I'm
mm-hmm.
not sure. Um, but yeah, it's close. But I have to give the edge to Giannis.
Okay.
And the thing with Jaren Jackson is, I think he was hurt for too long.
Mm-hmm.
Um, same thing happened with Bam. I think it was maybe I can't remember. Was it last year?
I think yeah, it was last year.
Yeah, it was last year. So I just think that it's Giannis. It has to be.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say.
Okay.
I don't have any like crazy points to
Mm-hmm.
validate it, but I gotta give it to Giannis.
Okay.
And like players when he's around, players shoot around
Mm-hmm.
like 38%. So he's just a rim protector and he intimidates people. That's what it comes down
Okay.
to.
So for me, I actually had the guy that you picked on,
Okay.
Darren Jackson Jr.
Okay.
For me, the main reason for me is that Memphis, they got the number 2 defense
Right.
in the league, right, just behind Cleveland or defensive rating. So they're right above Milwaukee. Milwaukee's third. But the weird thing for Giannis is that yes, he is a terrific defensive player. It's just kind of weird because this season is his defensive rating for this year is 107.4.
Hmm.
Obviously, it could change, later on. But last year it was actually 106, 105.
Right.
So his, higher defensive rating is normally worse. Jaren Jackson's is 104.4. Now, obviously, you don't want to necessarily just use individual defensive ratings.
Right.
Um, right. So that's why I brought out defensive ratings for the team. For the games played, they're actually 2 games apart.
Yeah.
So, like, the difference is, I guess, for Jaren Jackson Jr., he missed most of his games earlier in the
Yep.
season, and Giannis has missed most of his games as of late.
Right.
Um, for me, actually, if I was gonna pick a Bucks player, it might be actually Brook Lopez.
Okay.
When you look at the defensive ratings this season, when he's out there, they're one of the best defensive teams in the league, and when he's off, they're usually not as good. So I definitely think like somebody on the Bucks should be a runner up. So if it wasn't Jaren Jackson Jr., I would have Brook Lopez. But for me, I think I'm going to pick him. But I will say, you know, the only concern with Jaren Jackson is, which I understand why others may not pick him, is he does have the issue of fouling a lot, right? Because
Yeah.
usually when you look at most of the best defensive players, in the past, right, say like a Draymond, or Giannis won it before, right, or Kawhi won it a few years back, right?
Right.
Usually those guys aren't usually threats to foul out of a game, right? I mean, obviously anybody can foul out of a game, but he's Jaren Jackson Jr. is a guy that typically will rack up fouls over the course of a game, but this season, he's gotten better at it. it was still pretty rough to start the season, and that's part of why his numbers are up, right? 17.5, 6.6 rebounds, 3 blocks a game. His efficiency offensively is a lot better, so he's had a lot of growth on offense. And then again, still contributing to the defense. And, so for me, that's who I got as my pick. But, like I said, you can't necessarily go wrong with, somebody on the Bucks. But like I said, if it were the Bucks, I'd go with Lopez.
Yeah,
But
and
now I got Triple J.
yeah, yeah, and now like
Hmm.
you prefaced it earlier. We're not hating on these guys at all.
Exactly.
No knock towards them. They're the best players in the world, and that's why we're even talking about them because they're in
Hmm.
the runnings for these awards. But I do have a little bit of a counter to your point. I
Sure.
feel like this could go back and forth for a while, but
Right.
we can end it whenever. But back to the point where I was saying that Giannis, like when he's on people, they're
Hmm.
shooting around 38%, right?
Yeah.
But then if you look at Jaren Jackson, it's like 44,
Hmm.
and then Evan Mobley, it's like 48. So like
Yeah.
in my opinion, I just think Giannis is a little bit more intimidating. I think
Sure.
people aren't as people are more scared to go up against Giannis than they are Jaren Jackson Jr.
Yeah,
But
I
that's
believe
just
that.
that's just my opinion, and
Mhm.
we're both entitled to them, and I think we both have great takes, and I think
Mhm.
both of these guys will probably end up being the finalists. So
Yeah.
it'll be cool. So
Mhm.
moving on to Rookie of the Year, I think this one kind of goes without
Mhm.
question. I have Paolo Banchero,
Mm.
however you want to pronounce it.
Yep.
Yeah, I think he's in a league of his own. He's the lone runaway. And I really think the only thing that could have prevented him from getting this award was probably injury, but that didn't happen to a
Mhm.
extreme extent. Um, and yeah, he's the best rookie. He's light years ahead of everyone in his class, in my opinion. I think Chet probably would have given him a run for his money, but he was hurt as well. Um,
Mhm.
but once again, Paolo's not bad, and the Magic definitely have a future to build, and I'm excited to see what they do with their roster.
Yeah. I have him as well.
Yeah,
I mean, pretty much from start to finish, I think he's been the best and the most consistent rookie. 20 points a game, 6.5 rebounds, 3.5 assists. Those are really good
yeah,
numbers. The shooting splits obviously are not great, right? 42.5 from the field, 28 from three. I mean, in general, it's going to be hard for a rookie to be, super efficient, right? Because normally they're going to be on a team that's not very good.
right,
And they're going to have opportunities to put up a lot of numbers. But like I said, and there have been other guys that have played really well and have had stretches, right? Jabari Smith Jr. has been better as of late, right? Jalen Williams for Oklahoma City's been really good the last few months. But like I said, I think for him from start to finish, I think he's been the best and the most consistent. And so I think for me, that's where he edges out the rest of the crowd.
yeah.
So
I
I
agree
think
with
this
that.
one's kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah, I feel like he's in a league of his own, and
Yeah.
he can only go up from here. I'm
Right.
really
From the
excited.
moment he stepped on the court, it felt like he was ready to play in the NBA and contribute right away, in which you don't
Yeah,
necessarily always see from, guys, right? You look at the frame, you look at the athleticism and the skill, and he's still got a lot of room to grow because again, like I said, the shooting hasn't been great. And hopefully it gets better. And if it does, right, he's gonna be in that elite tier of players, I think.
yeah, and Jaden Ivey, I feel like I kind of had the same feeling about him early on,
Hmm.
but he got hurt pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of set him back. But yeah, Paolo's he's the one.
Yeah.
Um, I guess we'll move into six man of the year.
Yep.
Um, and for this one, I kind of have a hot take, and I
Hmm.
feel like people are gonna hate on it, but I'm gonna spew it anyways. And
Hmm.
my six man of the year is Jordan Poole.
Okay.
Um, I don't know if you really want to count him because he did
Hmm.
end up starting a lot due to the injuries
Hmm.
that the Warriors had, but I just feel like he's made that jump or he's in the process of making the jump to a full time starter at some point, and I would really like to see him improve even beyond this. But I think he helped the Warriors and kept them, somewhat afloat during
Hmm.
their rough patch, and they're still going through it. So, um, but yeah, I don't know. Like I understand Malcolm Brogdon probably does it more efficiently. And there's other
Hmm.
guys that do it more efficiently, but I gotta give it to Poole because
Hmm.
I don't know. It's just like there's just something about Poole, the electricity that he brings off the bench. It helps them, and you can definitely see it when they play.
Yeah. So for me, I actually have Malcolm Brogdon.
Okay.
For me, it's kind of like you said. The issue that I had with picking Poole was that he's had too many games as a starter. For
Yeah.
me, he started 42 games. He's
Yeah.
played every single game this season, so he's basically spent more than half the season as a starter.
Right.
Um, I mean, for Poole, obviously the splits haven't been that great this season. I mean, it makes sense that the efficiency is going to go down because he's now, like you said, a bigger part of the offense. Even though obviously there's an adjustment period playing, with Steph and Clay and all those other guys. He's still young. He's got room to grow. He's just been so up and down this season. Whereas I just feel like with Brogdon, I mean, he's been putting up 15 and 4, right? Great splits, 48% from the field, 46 from 3, 88 from the line. Um, he's obviously played in fewer games, right? 60 games as opposed to 72 for Poole. I just feel like again, for me, it's just he's been one of the best six men on one of the best teams. And he's been, like I said, putting up great efficiency, and every single game he's come off the bench. So, like I said, just for me, I think, actually coming off the bench more often than not should probably qualify you for six man of the year more than being having more games as a starter. And like I said, I also, kind of like what you said with MVP, kind of value the wins too. And again, it's not all Poole's fault, right? There's a lot of reasons why Golden State struggled this season, right? I know a lot of people, have put a lot of hate on Poole this year, but there's other reasons for that, but I think for Brogdon, he's been overall much more consistent on a better
Yeah.
team. So that's why I have him. It was really hard though, because it was kind of hard for me to choose between him and Emmanuel quickly for the Knicks.
Oh yeah.
But and it's kind of like what we said before when we talk about these things could change, right? Because for a while it pretty much was Brogdon. Some people had Westbrook earlier in the
Yeah.
season
I heard about
for
that.
six man of the year. Right now he's starting with the Clippers. I mean, he'll end up having more games off the bench than as a starter. But, again, like I said, for me, the pick is Brogdon, just because
Yeah.
I think from start to finish, he's been, very consistent and very good.
Right. Yeah, great points. I like that a lot. And like I said, I can understand Malcolm Brogdon being everyone's favorite, but I gotta pick Poole. But
Hmm.
it is what it is.
Yeah.
Moving on to most improved player. I
Hmm.
think this one's a very interesting one. I think it's the
Hmm.
tightest race. I think,
Okay.
and I have to shout out the guys that I'm not gonna pick. So shout out to Shea.
Hmm.
Shout out to Jalen Brunson. Great
Hmm.
guys, great hoopers, and they've really made a difference for their prospective teams or respective teams. But I gotta pick Markkinen, and
Okay.
the reason I pick him is because people wrote him off,
Hmm.
and he didn't write back, and
Yeah.
that's the simple story here. Um,
Hmm.
he had an interesting career in Chicago. People kind of compared him to Porzingis a little bit. Then moved on to um, Cleveland, and that was an interesting one too. He didn't really fit necessarily, and they moved him to Utah. And it's just great to see. And now he was an All Star this season, and I think he's made that jump to where he people respect him now, and he's a top player. I'm not gonna go as far to say top 15, obviously, but
Hmm.
he's a top player, and his numbers show for it, and that's all
Yeah.
I can really say about him. I think he should win Most Improved.
I'm not gonna lie, I actually had Laurie Markkinen as well.
Okay.
Um, to be honest, it was like you said, it was really close for me
Yeah.
between him and Shea. Shea's been just incredible this year, right? Going from, being 24 a game score to over 30 a game
Right.
on a really good team. But for me personally, I think with Markkinen, it's just you look at the tiers in terms of what he was to what he is now, right? Because before he was like a solid player, right?
Right.
But like you said, a lot of people had kind of started to write him off. Um, but now, right, he's an all-star for the first time, right? I don't know if he'll make all NBA, but I mean, he's got
Maybe.
a pretty solid case for it. With all the forwards, I don't know if he'll get in. Um, but I think, like I said, that jump, that tier from just solid, decent player to all-star plus, basically, I think that's what it is for me.
Yep.
Whereas like Shea was already really good,
Right.
and now he's even better than what he already was. Whereas for me, like I said, I look at it from the perspective of, okay, you were basically a role player on your previous teams,
Right.
right? Like an okay starter role player. Now you're an all-star, right?
Yep.
Borderline, like I said, all-star plus. Um, for the first time in your career. And I guess Shea is also an all-star, right, for the first
Yeah.
time in his career. But like I said, I just think the jump is bigger. right? It's kind of like, last year, where Ja Morant, right, was picked as most improved.
Right.
I personally thought it was going to be Jordan Poole.
Same.
Because like I said, I thought Ja Morant was already really good and he got
Right.
even better, even though he was really good.
Right.
But like I said, I look at it like, what tier were you before? What tier are you now? But then you could also make the argument, for Shea. Well, before he was an all-star. Now some people might have him as like an all NBA, close to superstar.
Right.
So I think that's also, again, that works too. But like I said, for me, I just have Mark in it because
Yeah.
I just think it's very difficult to go from a role player to an all-star versus already being, an all-star to now a higher level player, all NBA, you
Yeah.
know. But I guess you could also factor in, and again, like I said with Shea, right? His team's doing much better than expected, but so is Utah, right? They're basically around the same record.
Yeah.
Um, so like I said, for me personally, I got Laurie Markkinen as well, but
Yeah.
it was really close.
The jump is crazy because
Yeah,
Markkinen went from he's averaging 10 more points than he did last season. So
yeah,
that just puts it into perspective.
absolutely.
And moving on to our final award, I
Mhm.
think this is coach of the year. Yeah.
Yeah.
So coach of the year. This one is interesting, but I got to
Mhm.
give it to Mike Brown,
Mhm.
and that is because he, completely turned around that Kings organization. Now they're in the playoffs for the first time since 2006. And we mentioned it a couple times on the podcast in previous episodes, that he could potentially be their X factor in the playoffs. And yeah, I just think he should win coach of the year because of the record turnaround.
Mhm.
I think
Yeah.
it's just that simple.
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much agree. I mean, Sacramento right now, right, they're basically right there with Memphis, right, second,
Yeah.
third in the Western Conference. Nobody expected them to do this well. And a lot of credit goes to Mike Brown. I mean, of course there's always, other candidates that people can have, but I think he's the prohibitive favorite
Yeah,
for
me
coach of
too.
the year just because again, it's kind of like what we talked about with most improved. Where were you before versus where are you now? Right? And Sacramento had not made the playoffs, in what, 15 plus years,
Yep.
right? Now Sacramento is pretty much firmly in the playoffs for the first time in a while, right? Like we said, over 15 years. And I think, like you said, you got to give credit to Mike Brown for being able to turn that around, being able to get the most out of that roster. Because again, like it's like what we said before, right? Nobody expected the Kings to be this good this season. When you look at their best players, right, Sabonis and De'Aaron Fox, you're thinking like, what what is the ceiling for that team, right?
Right.
I think most people probably would have thought a lower playoff seed, maybe more like a play-in team, right? But certainly not at the top of the Western Conference, particularly in a year where the Western Conference has been so wide open and so compact where it doesn't feel like there's a team significantly better than the others. You still would have expected Sacramento to be lower, but they've been great. Obviously, don't play much defense, but doesn't matter, right? They're still
Yeah.
winning games. What, 43 plus wins on the season,
Yep.
right? There's only a handful of teams that have won over 40 games, and they're one of them. So I think you got to give credit to Mike Brown for that. I don't think there's anybody else that's in the discussion for that one.
Yeah. And shout out to the players too. It's not all the
Yeah,
coach.
exactly.
The
Yeah,
players
yeah,
made the
that too.
jump too.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think that does it for the awards. And I know I had some hot takes, so we're kind of gonna keep that going.
Yeah.
Um,
We're gonna
and
save the All NBA and All NBA defense awards, I think, for probably towards the end of the season.
yeah, that'll be a
Just
fun topic.
mhm.
But like I said, I know I had some hot takes, so we're kind of gonna transition into that. Gonna
Yeah.
do a little news segment. Just
Hmm.
because news is light. But welcome to Yarby's hot takes now.
Hmm.
And I'm gonna give out just to preface how this is gonna go. I'm gonna give out my hot takes, and then Chris is gonna react to them. And yeah, it should be fun.
Yeah.
But for the first one, I know this is gonna be extremely hot. But
Hmm.
this is also due to my hatred of the team. So my first hot take, we're gonna do three. So my first one is the Celtics get bounced in the first round of the playoffs.
Wow, really?
Yeah. Um,
Okay. I'm
yeah.
curious to hear this one.
So the reason that I say that they could get bounced is because I know that they've dropped to three, and I know they're only like what, a game behind the 76ers right now.
Right.
But I don't know, man. They just don't look like the Celtics from earlier in the season.
Hmm.
The Celtics where Tatum was the front runner for MVP at one point. Um, they just don't have the firepower that I thought that they really did. And we talked about it on the podcast a couple times, and I know this is kind of a complete 180 of what I was talking about a couple weeks ago.
But things can change.
But
So
things do change, and I'm not liking what I see from Boston. And if the playoffs started today, they're the third seed. They would be playing, the Nets, and I think the Nets could give them a run for their money. And honestly, if they drop, you know, I really wanted them to play the Heat, because I would have thought the Heat would have been a more competitive than the Nets, but the Nets are a decent team, and I think the Nets can easily bounce them if they just focus in and have a game plan on stopping Tatum and Brown. I think if you stop Tatum and Brown, the Celtics roster becomes a little bit more, what's the word? It's like they're
a
not
little more
as,
vulnerable.
yeah, a little bit more vulnerable. Like they're not as fearsome as you would think.
Mm,
They do have some solid pieces around, but once you learn how to attack them, I think you can probably bounce them. And I think
mm.
fatigue is going to hit this team hard. It has in the past, so I'm going to stick with that. I don't What are your thoughts on that? Do
Yeah.
you agree or
Well,
do you completely disagree and you think it's just hot?
uh, okay. I feel like this one probably leaned more towards hot. I
Okay.
mean, I will say with the Celtics, they have not looked as good recently. They're 5-5 in their last 10, right? It's kind of like what I said with Philly, where it seems like they're peaking, and I do think it is kind of important to close out the season on a good note. And
Right.
it doesn't feel like they're doing that. The defense doesn't feel like it's been the same. Obviously they've had issues, in terms of health, right? I think some of
Mhm.
the guys like Marcus Smart, he's been out, and even when he's been out there, he just hasn't been the same player, right? He
Right.
won Defensive Player of the Year last year, right? I don't think he's in contention for it at all right now. I mean, from what I've seen and from what it seems like a lot of the Vegas odds are.
Yeah.
Robert Williams, right? You just can't rely on him health wise, right? Which is unfortunate because when he's on the court and he plays, he changes a lot of what Boston can do on both ends of the floor. Even though you don't look at him as a scorer, just
Yeah.
his ability to be a lob threat, um, kind of changes what they can do. In terms of getting easy baskets, he's a good passer, and obviously he's a great shot blocker defender, right? He can get offensive rebounds, defensive rebounds. But again, you look at last season, right? He had stretches where he missed time last year, even in the playoffs, and they were able to do fine
Right.
without him. Obviously you want all your guys long term, but I do think that it wouldn't shock me if they didn't get to the finals, for sure. And I didn't have them getting to the finals. I had Milwaukee, getting to the finals. But it definitely is kind of weird to see them not be as good as they were earlier in the season. And again, it's kind of like Denver, where you do wonder, like, is it maybe just kind of just them sort of just coasting and kind of just going through it before the playoffs, or is it something else? Um, I don't know necessarily. We'll have to see more. Also, for me personally, I know you like him, but I still have some questions about Missoula, with his coaching. And I just
Mm,
do kind of wonder, like, come playoff time, like, is there going to be a scenario where he just makes a mistake
right.
and it ends up being really costly? I still, we talked about coaching before. I still do feel like at the end of the day, like, the players matter more than the coaches, but I do think the coaches can always make a difference, especially in a tight series, right?
Oh
When you
yeah.
have two teams that are really close in terms of talent and, just being able to get the most out of your players. So, I mean, like I said, I think it's personally a hot take, but I would say that Boston hasn't looked as good as of late, and it wouldn't surprise me if they do get bounced, maybe in the second round. Like maybe
Right.
they do lose to Philly, right? I
Right.
mean, I don't think Philly's going to the finals because have questions about them from a playoff standpoint. But certainly, if Boston continues to play like this, where it doesn't feel like their defense has been the same, right? And some other guys from last year haven't been as good. Like I said, Grant Williams, Marcus Smart. I mean, they could go out early, right? Because then, like you said, that talent that it seemed like that they had before, all of a sudden doesn't feel as good, and you might find yourself in a dogfight in the first round.
Yep. Simple as that.
Yeah.
Um all right, moving on for my next hot take. This one is kind of directed at you.
Mhm.
Not you personally, but your
Right.
team. And that is Lakers don't make the playoffs.
Mhm.
And it's unfortunate because I love D'Angelo Russell. I like AD a
Mhm.
lot.
Mhm.
I like your squad, but I don't know if they have enough to break out of that 11th spot.
Mhm.
Um, I know you're tied with the Pelicans, but all you have to do is really beat out the Jazz, which shouldn't be too hard. But I don't know when LeBron is supposedly coming back.
Right.
AD with his health is always a question, so you never know.
Hmm.
And D'Lo too, honestly, if you want me to be frank.
Yeah,
Just
sure.
health. Health is what's the Lakers' biggest enemy is, I think.
Hmm.
Um and consistency. I do like the squad, but you guys are on a
Hmm.
2 game losing streak.
Yeah.
And AD had the um big sell, big time sell. I mean, he
Yeah.
fouled,
Right.
then he missed the free throws.
Yep.
So it just didn't look good. It didn't look like a playoff team.
Hmm.
And yeah, those are my concerns with you guys. So I think you guys might not make the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the standings and it's so close right now. And obviously, the last two losses are pretty, painful if you're the Lakers, right?
Right.
Especially losing at the buzzer, right? If you win, you're tied for the seventh seed. And you have a chance at being in that 7-8 playing spot, right? But you lose and now you're 11th. Teams around you are, I don't think any of these teams are going to give up.
Right.
So that definitely makes it tough for LeBron. I feel like he probably won't be back until the last week of the regular season.
Okay.
I mean, I could be wrong, but it just feels like from what people had been saying and, from the fact that we don't really have any concrete updates yet, it feels like he probably won't be back until the last week. And that could be, incredibly pivotal. I mean, every game matters right now.
Right.
Um, but obviously, you win three in a row, right? Just like you lost two in a row, things can change. You can be right back there. But like you said, it's going to be because LeBron's out, you got to rely on AD, you got to rely on D'Lo, and you kind of just have to hope that those guys, along with the role players, are good enough, to get you through the schedule. I mean, they have the easiest strength of schedule, but in my opinion, personally, even though I've heard a lot of people say the strength of schedules for different teams, I don't really think it matters a whole lot at this point because
Right.
I think every team still has something to play for. And just on any given night, anybody can win, right? Because it's the NBA.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know. Like I said, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say that's a hot take because again, it's so close right now. Again, you lose 3, 4 in a row, right? And some other team around you wins 3, 4 in a row, it's over.
Okay.
Because there's only, most teams probably have not much more than like 10, 11 games left in the regular season anyways. So at this point, you kind of have to step it up. So I don't think that's necessarily a hot take. I would be surprised if they didn't at least make the play in.
Okay.
But again, if they, like I said, if they lose a handful of their next several games, then they will, right? Because
Yeah.
again, it's the easiest schedule left. So you shouldn't lose to most of those teams, even without LeBron.
Yeah.
So I don't. I mean, I still think they'll make the play in, but I don't think that's a hot take. Like it could,
Playing
it could definitely happen.
playing is included in the playoffs for me personally. So
Yeah,
that
it
is
could definitely
included.
happen.
So
Yeah,
they could miss the play in, and that is included with my hot take
for
or
sure. Yeah,
my
and
take.
yeah, and again, this is kind of the I guess the conundrum with the team is we just haven't seen a whole lot of them at full strength.
Right.
Obviously they had, earlier in the season they had a ton of struggles, right? The 2-10 start put them in a hole,
Yep.
but this is a completely different team. And we just don't know what we're going to get out of them, without LeBron. Obviously, there's a higher ceiling with him, but he's not there right now, so that makes a difference. And that's why, a lot of those games earlier in the season, because you mentioned the Dallas game with AD, but there were also a number of other games, where the team had an opportunity to win and, one thing happened or another, and then they
Right.
ended up blowing it. I think AD had a couple of other games, where he missed a game clinching free throw. I think I looked it up the other day. Um, in terms of late game free throw shooting, he's only around 50%,
Yeah.
late in games. Now, again, it's a very small sample size. I think Schroeder and LeBron lead the team in late game free throw shooting. They're actually at 100%, which is
That's
kind of
crazy.
surprising. Um, Again, small sample size because they
Right.
haven't had but so many games where it's like you need to make these two free throws to win. But in the situations where they've been in them, he's been their worst late game free throw shooter, which is kind of surprising because you look at him, he's shooting 80% on the season because the last couple of seasons he was shooting a lower percentage, but this season he's gotten back to his normal 80% range. But late in games, it's been a concern, right? And in a lot of these games that are going to be competitive, going to be tight, everything matters, and you got to get what you can out of him because he's the guy. Now that LeBron's out, that you got to go to, and if he doesn't get it done, there's going to be a lot of questions about him this offseason. Not necessarily whether or not they trade him, but
Right.
still, there's going to be a lot of those questions, and I don't think he would want that. So yeah, like I said, I agree with you. I don't think it's a hot take. I think they'll make the play in. I don't think they'll miss the playoffs, but I don't think it's a hot take.
Okay. All right. For my final one, I think this is
Mhm.
probably the least hot. But I'm going with Beal request a trade if the Wizards get a top
Okay.
7 pick.
That's funny because before you say something, in
What's
my
up?
mind, I was thinking that somebody in the offseason would request a trade. I ended up not doing any hot takes, but I think
Right.
that's definitely one that's,
Yeah.
likely. You can cut this part out. That was kind of useless. Go
No,
ahead.
it's fine. No, we'll keep it in.
Uh, okay. All right.
But yeah, so like, and well, like you were saying, I think there's multiple candidates. I'll
Yeah.
explain the Beal one in a second, but another one could be
Mm-hmm.
Dame. Dame could be traded, but he has expressed some loyalty, so that may or may not
Mm-hmm.
happen. But with Beal, I think it's just like he just visibly looks frustrated. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Wizards can't close games, and it seems like Beal, Porzingis, and Kuzma rotate on dropping 30-point games in losses, and
Mm-hmm.
that's not a good situation to be in, especially with Beal getting up in age. And I think he's going to request a trade, especially if they get a high pick. I
Mm-hmm.
think that will be the thing that pushes him out. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and if he leaves, that kind of frees up a ton of money for the Wizards. But we'll
Mm-hmm.
see what happens. But I mean, I don't know if you agree with that or if you think that's going to
Mm-hmm.
happen. But let me know.
Yeah. I personally don't think that's a hot take either.
Okay.
Because I do think, when you look at the Wizards, when you look at the standings, they're what, 12th in the Eastern
Yep.
Conference, tied with the Pacers.
Yep.
Not completely out of it, but obviously, we talked about it before, right? Just as easily as they can win 3, 4, 5 games in a row, they could lose 3, 4, 5 games
Right.
in a row, right? And at this point in the season, you just can't do that if you want to make the play in. And you do kind of wonder, right, with the Wizards, they've just been kind of lackluster the last few seasons. And you wonder how long is Beal going to be okay with that? I mean, he hasn't expressed completely a desire to leave, even though I feel like there's been some interviews at times that
Yeah.
he's had where it feels like at the very least he's not happy with the
Right.
losing. But I mean, it wouldn't shock me. The thing with him is he has a no trade clause. So, you know, um, if he wants to go, it's going to be, he's going to completely decide where he wants to go, right? It's not going to be like a Kyrie situation where they just move him wherever they want. And
Yeah.
I don't think they would do that anyways,
No.
just because of, because I think they love him in Washington. But I think it could definitely happen. I don't know necessarily if it'll be this offseason, but I do believe that it is more than possible. And especially because, again, you look around the league and you look at some of these other teams, right? And they're going to look to upgrade their rosters.
Yep.
And I could see a team talking themselves into trading for Bradley Beal. Again, the concern is I don't know if he's as valuable now, not because he's declined at all, but only because of his contract.
Right.
You look at that Westbrook situation with the Lakers, that really hampered their ability to add talent.
Yep.
And I feel like it's okay to do that with like a top 5 player, right? But with somebody who I don't think is a top 5, 10 player, I think that's probably a little bit more difficult for a team to swallow.
Yeah.
Um, but I do think it's certainly possible. If he asks out, I would assume he would get traded, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't think they would, do a situation like Brooklyn did with Durant where they would just kind of hold out. I think they would probably trade him. Obviously, you'd like to get something back for him, but
Right.
I don't think you're going to get the same amount, right? Because, Beal versus KD, those are two different tiers. So I definitely think that could happen.
Yeah.
I don't know if it would necessarily be this offseason, but it wouldn't necessarily shock me
Right.
as much as he's expressed his love for DC,
Yeah.
which I
And
think is real.
yeah, and I think, and that's what I'm saying. Like his love for DC
Mhm.
is real, so that's kind of why I had it as a hot take. Because if your love for a place is real, I don't think you would really request a trade. So that's the logic behind me picking that. But that about
Right.
does it for our hot take session. Let me know in the
Mhm.
or let us know in the comments if you like that segment or not. It was kind of winged, but we did it, and yeah, just
Yeah.
let us know if you want to see more content from us like that.
Uh, do we want to do the news thing or should we just wrap it up?
We can wrap it up.
All
Yeah.
right. Well, that's it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. We always appreciate the support that you show for our content. So, thanks for listening. We appreciate it. And we'll see you Friday.